Good to be with you once again, brothers and sisters, and all praises to the Most High. I'm your host, the Apostle Reuben of IUPR Bible Radio podcasting out of Little Rock, Arkansas. To the true saints of the Most High God. Well, seeing that I'm not on a time limit, like I am when I do videos for TikTok, in 10 minutes you got to have it timed. But not today. Full podcast episode. Thanksgiving Day. Now, of course, brothers and sisters, we here at IUPR want nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with any feast that is not biblical. But you know what? The Christians, when it comes down to these feasts created by man, they will keep these feasts and still claim to worship God, to serve God. Now, in this podcast episode, what we're going to do is we're going to start in the Old Testament because there's something I want you to see. And then we're going to go directly to the New Testament because there is a lot to prove in this podcast episode. So without further delay, let us go into it. Now, we're in the law. We are in the law. And I felt that it was appropriate to start in the law. And we might work our way back into the law from the New Testament as needed. But to start in the law is appropriate. The book of Deuteronomy 16:16. 3 times in a year shall all thy males appear before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose. In the feast of unleavened bread, and in the feast of weeks, and in the feast of tabernacles. And they shall not appear before the Lord empty. Now, I'm going to come back to this verse, but there was a reason, and I want to get this out of the way right now. When it says, and they shall not appear before the Lord empty, I want to go to Psalm 68:29, just to get that understood, why that was said. Psalm 68. Psalm 68. Verse 28. Thy God hath commanded thy strength. Strengthen, O God, that which thou hast wrought for us, because of thy temple at Jerusalem shall kings bring presents unto thee. So this was why the Lord told them not to come up to Jerusalem empty-handed. Now, I'm going to show you. Now, let me do this. Let me do this because I think I jumped the gun. I don't usually do this. But I want to go back to the book of Deuteronomy. I kind of jumped the gun with that one. Let me put it back in order. The book of Deuteronomy 16:16. Deuteronomy 16:16. Let me put this back in order. I'm sorry about that, brothers and sisters. Deuteronomy 16:16. 3 times in a year shall all thy males appear before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose. Now, what is this place he chose? You have to know it. 2 Chronicles. Let's do that first. 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles 6. Let's look at the place that God chose. 2 Chronicles 6, verse 5. Since the day that I brought forth my people out of the land of Egypt, I chose no city among all the tribes of Israel to build an house in. And house in, that my name might be there. Neither chose I any man to be ruler over my people Israel. I didn't just choose any man, but I have chosen Jerusalem. See, that is the place the Lord chose to put his name there. He chose Jerusalem to put his name there, his house there, his temple there. That's the place he chose. But I have chosen Jerusalem that my name might be there, and have chosen David to be over my people Israel. So when we go back to Deuteronomy, just to clear this up, Deuteronomy 16. In verse 16, 3 times in a year shall all thy males appear before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose. That was Jerusalem. He chose Jerusalem. In the feast of unleavened bread, and in the feast of weeks, and in the feast of tabernacles. And they shall not appear before the Lord empty. They shall not appear before the Lord empty. So when they went to Jerusalem 3 times in a year, it would be the feast of unleavened bread, which is the Passover. The Passover. The feast of weeks, which is the Pentecost. And then the feast of tabernacles. The feast of tabernacles was the 3rd time they were to appear before the Lord. Excuse me. And they shall not appear before the Lord empty. Now, let's go to Psalms, because this is why it says again. Now, it says the place which he shall choose would be Jerusalem. The feast of unleavened bread, the feast of weeks, the feast of tabernacles. And they shall not appear before the Lord empty. So all Israelite males had to go to Jerusalem 3 times in a year. And they were not to go empty-handed. Why? Let's go back to the book of Psalm 68. Now let's look at Psalm 68. I did this out of order. Usually don't do that. But Psalm 68. Let's read verse 29 again. Psalm 68 and 29. Because of thy temple at Jerusalem, shall kings bring presents unto thee. See, kings from who? Israel. They brought presents to Jerusalem unto the temple. That is what the law required. This was law. This was the law. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to take you to about, 3 precepts in the Old Testament, in the law, which they call the writings of Moses, to show you again the 3 times as witness. As witness. Remember, we're going to go back to Deuteronomy 16:16 first, and then we're going to watch this. Deuteronomy 16. Verse 16, 3 times in a year shall all thy males appear before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose, which is Jerusalem, in the feast of unleavened bread, and in the feast of weeks, and in the feast of tabernacles. We're going to look at all 3 of those feasts being kept in the New Testament. Trust us. And they shall not appear before the Lord empty, because they had to bring gifts unto the temple. That was law. Law now. I want to go here. I want to go to the book of Exodus 23:17. Now, let's get these precepts, because this was said more than once. It was said more than once. Exodus 23. Verse 16. And the feast of harvest, the first fruits of thy labor, this is the Pentecost here, which thou hast sown in the field, and the feast of ingathering, which is in the end of the year, and when thou hast gathered in thy labors out of the field. Watch this. 3 times in the year all thy males shall appear before the Lord God. See? 3 times in a year all the males were to appear before the Lord God. Not the woman and children, just the males. This was the law. Let's look at this again now. Exodus 34, verse 23. Thrice in the year shall all your men children appear before the Lord God, the God of Israel. So we continue to see this over and over. 3 times in a year they shall appear before the Lord God. 3 times in a year. Now we're going to take a look. Let's go to the book of 2 Chronicles 8. I'm just doing this for witness, so you can have witness. This is written in the Bible multiple times as a law for Israel. A law for Israel. Watch this. 2 Chronicles 8:13. Even after certain rate every day. Now see, do I want to go here? Okay. Yes, I do. 2 Chronicles 8:12. Then Solomon offered burnt offerings unto the Lord on the altar of the Lord, which he had built before the porch. Even after a certain rate every day, offering according to the commandment of Moses, on the Sabbaths, and on the new moons, and on the solemn feasts, 3 times in the year, even the feast of unleavened bread, and then the feast of weeks, and then the feast of tabernacles. This is the same thing written in Deuteronomy 16:16. So they were keeping this law. 3 times in the year you had to appear into Jerusalem. 3 times. You had to go to Jerusalem to keep these 3 feasts. They had to go to Jerusalem to keep these 3 feasts. Unleavened bread, Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Tabernacles. So what I want to do is I want to go to the book of John 11. Let's go into the New Testament. John 11. John 11. And verse 54. The Messiah therefore walked no more openly among the Jews, but went thence into a country near to the wilderness, and to a city called Ephraim, and there continued with his disciples. And the Jews' Passover was nigh at hand, and many went up out of the country up to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves, to cleanse themselves. Look at what the Passover is. Jerusalem. Jerusalem. Understand that the Passover being one of the feasts, they would have to go to Jerusalem. Witness is right here. Now, as we go to chapter 12 and 1. Then the Messiah 6 days before the Passover came to Bethany. There Lazarus was which had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. So 6 days before the Passover, we're showing you the Passover, one of the feasts that they had to go to Jerusalem to keep. Now, I want to drop down John chapter 12, verse 18. For this cause the people also met him, for they had heard that he had done this miracle. That's raised Lazarus from the dead. Look at this. The Pharisees therefore said among themselves, perceive ye how ye prevail nothing. Behold, the world is gone after him. See, the world is gone after him, but brothers and sisters, it keeps saying the world is gone after him, but when we look at the book of Romans, just real quick, the book of Romans, I want you to see Romans 15 and verse 8, then we're going to come back. Who is this world following him? All nations didn't, showing you here. Now I say that the Messiah Christ was a minister of the circumcision, the Jews. He only taught the Jews. Christ didn't teach all nations. He only taught the Jews. So how can the world go after Christ and he never taught all nations? If the world, let me show you something, brothers and sisters. If the Bible, when we go back to John, see, common sense has to come in. And most people don't want common sense. They want to play the game, and everything's about emotion. John 12:19. The Pharisee therefore said among themselves, perceive ye how ye prevail nothing. Behold, the world is gone after him. Did all nations go after Christ? No. He didn't teach all nations. And the proof he didn't teach all nations is in the book of Romans. So how can the book of Romans 15? Because that gets me every time. I'm looking at Romans 15:8. Paul lets us know, now I say that the Messiah Christ was a minister of the circumcision. Christ only taught the Jews, folk. He didn't teach everybody. He only taught the Jews. Here it is. For the truth of God, to confirm the promises made unto the fathers. Christ was sent to teach the Jews only. He was not sent to teach Northern Kingdom or any other nation. He was sent to teach the Jews. This is a fact. Christians like to avoid it. Christians love to avoid the facts. They love to avoid the facts. But it's a fact. Christ only came to minister unto the Jews and the Jews only. That's why when you go back to Romans chapter 9. Now, I usually don't read verse 5 with this, but I want you to look at this. It says, for I could wish that myself were accursed from Christ for my brethren, my kinsmen, according to the flesh, who are Israelites, to whom pertaineth the adoption, and the glory, and the covenants, and the giving of the law, and the service of God, and the promises, whose are the fathers, and of whom as concerning the flesh Christ came. Christ was sent to the circumcision. He was sent to the members of the covenant, not everybody. Who is over all. God bless forever. Amen. So Christ, of whom concerning the flesh came, meaning he came for the circumcision. He came for the Israelites, but in the order. The order would be the Jew first, and then the what? Greek or Gentile. But you must remember, as I always said, when you can see, because if you think, when you think of Gentile, they make you think of non-Jew, non-Israelite. That's not written. If you can't find what's not, we're being honest with you, brothers and sisters. If you can't find non-Jew, non-Israel in the Bible, that means it was fabricated as a thought. That's an opinion. That is a theory. What you cannot find in the Bible is a theory. For I could wish that myself were accursed from Christ for my brethren, my kinsmen, according to the flesh, who are Israelites. Who are Israelites. So Paul's brethren, his kinsmen, according to the flesh, were Israelites. And I'm going to, again, just to show you, here is the record, the actual record of what a Gentile would be. 1 Corinthians 12:1. Now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I would not have you ignorant. The brethren, Paul's brethren, no verse in the Bible, Christians, no verse that the Christians can come up with that would show brethren would mean to other nations. The brethren was your kinsmen according to the flesh. So these are Jews in Corinth, Paul is writing to. As a matter of fact, going back to chapter 10, moreover, brethren, moreover, brethren, there's that brethren. I would not that you should be ignorant how that all our fathers were under the cloud and all passed through the sea. All our fathers was Israelites. They passed through the cloud and the sea. You know what and see, this is what this is a direct verse. But you know that the Christians would try to work that mixed multitude in there. See, that right there is blasphemy. They would try to work that, it was a mixed multitude that came out with them. When it clearly says our fathers were under the cloud, not the mixed multitude was under the cloud. Understand the brethren is your own people. That's why Paul says, now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I will not have you ignorant. Ye know that ye were Gentiles carried away unto these dumb idols, even as ye were led. A Gentile is an idolater. It did not say non-Jew here. A Gentile could be. Let me give you an example. Let me give you an example. Now we're back here in the Compact Bible Dictionary. Now we're going to read up at the top. Not concerned about the bottom right now, but at the top. It says Greece, Grecia, Grecians. Grecia is Greece, the home of the Hellenist Greeks. And Grecians, however, are to be distinguished, meaning there were two types. Greeks are generally those of Hellenic race. Hellenic race. Hellenic race. Let's go down to the bottom. Hellenists, Jews who made Greek their tongue, and with it often adopted Greek ideas and practices. So these people know that the Hellenists were Jews who made Greek their tongue. That's why Paul could speak Greek. This is the secret kept by these pastors. These pastors, these false teachers, they won't go into details about this because they don't want you to know. They don't want you to know that. Let's go back up. Grecia is Greece, the home of the Hellenes. Greeks and Grecians, however, are to be distinguished. Greeks are generally those of Hellenic race. The Hellenic race is the Jews. So the Greeks, they're telling you that the Greeks are the Hellenic race, which were the Jews. The Hellenic were the Jews who made Greek their tongue. So they're saying right here that the Greek is a Jew. Look, Hellenic race. Hellenic race. Hellenists down at the bottom. Look at the bottom. Jews who made Greek their tongue, and with it often adopted Greek ideals and practices. So the Hellenic race were the Jews in Greece. But let's read on. And probably Acts 16:1, Acts 18:4, and probably John 12:20. Now we're going to go to John 12:20 once again, because they know. But the word may be used to indicate non-Jew. There it is with that non-Jew again. They always bring that non-Jew, foreigners and aliens, Romans 1:16, so they could try to tie in it. But we're going to take a look at that. Grecians were Greek-speaking Jews, so the Greek-speaking Jews were Greeks. They were Greek citizens. Grecians were Greek-speaking Jews, folk of the dispersion, people that were scattered among them from areas predominantly Greek. The scholars knew that these Greeks were Greek-speaking Jews. There was a difference between the two. There was your Greek that was a Hellenist Jew. He was a Greek. They're not going to call them Jew Greek or Greek Jews. They're not going to put two nationalities on them. When you were born there, that's what you were. These Christians. Greeks are generally those of Hellenic race. That's the Jews that were born there. They're Greeks as well. So when we go back up to the Bible, when Paul says, now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I will not have you ignorant. Ye know that ye were Gentiles carried away unto these dumb idols, even as ye were led. The reason why they were Gentiles was because they were in idolatry. That is what a Gentile was according to Paul. There is no non-Jew or non-Israelite here. None. So again, here's what we're going to do, because I kind of went off the horn a little bit trying to prove this. We're going to go back to the book of John, chapter 12, because we were talking about the world. We're talking about the world. John 12. Verse 19, let's get this back straight. The Pharisee therefore said among themselves, perceive ye how ye prevail nothing? Behold, the world is gone after him. Now we know Christ According, again, back to Romans 15:8. If the world has gone after him. Now, the Christians equivalent this world is everybody. But that's not what the Bible says. Romans 15:8. Romans 15:8. Now I say that the Messiah Christ was a minister of the circumcision. He only taught the circumcision. He was a minister of the circumcision for the truth of God, to confirm the promises made unto the fathers. So the Bible lets us know that the only ones Christ taught and ministered unto was the Jews. So how can, when we go back to John 12, because this is going to be important for you to know, we go back to John 12:19. John 12:19. And the Pharisee therefore said among themselves, perceive ye how ye prevail nothing. Behold, the world is gone after him. Meaning there had to be a world that went after him, because Christ didn't teach the nations. So how can Christians equivalent the world to the nations when Christ never taught all nations? He never did. He sent them apostles out to do that at the end. So this world has to be something else. And it's this. The world. Look at this. John 18. Verse 20. Christ is going to say it. The Messiah answered him, I spake openly to the world. I ever taught in the synagogue and in the temple, whether the Jews always resort. See who that world was? The Jews. That world was the Jews. I spake openly to the world. Let's see if Christ said he spake to the nations, other nations besides Israel. I ever taught in the synagogue and in the temple, whether the Jews always resort. So that world was the Jews. That was the world. Let's go back to John 12. Just showing you, you got to read who that world is. So when we go back to John 12:19, the Pharisee therefore said among themselves, perceive ye how ye prevail nothing. Behold, the world, which were the Jews, is gone after him. And there were certain Greeks among them that came up to worship at the feast. Stop. There were certain Greeks that came up to worship at the feast. Let me ask you, see, and this is what I would ask the Christian. Because you have to have precepts to prove things. I said it before, and I'm going to say it again. You have to have precepts to prove things. So if I'm looking for the Christian to prove something, I would ask them to prove when did other nations come to keep the feast of the Jews? Perhaps, brothers and sisters, I'm a little slow here. I want to go back to the book of John. Let's look at this. I want y'all to see, because it can't be a record of this. John chapter 5 verse 1. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and the Messiah went up to Jerusalem. So this is a feast of the Jews. There was no feast of the nations. There was a feast of the Jews being kept into the New Testament. Feast of the Jews. The Jews are keeping the feast. So when I go to, wait a minute, just John chapter 6, verse 3. And the Messiah went up into a mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. And the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was nigh. Get the point? The feasts were kept by the Jews. The feasts were not kept by the nations. The feasts were kept by the Jews. So what is this? Wait a minute. Again, let's go to John chapter 4. We're just looking at these precepts. John chapter 4, verse 19. Our fathers, John chapter 4, verse 19. Sorry about that. The woman saith unto him, Sir, I perceive that thou art a prophet. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and ye say that in Jerusalem is the place where men are to worship. Jerusalem. But is Christ telling another nation, because they will equivalent this woman to a what they would call non-Israelite, but the woman says, watch what the woman says. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and ye say that in Jerusalem is the place where men, which men were to go worship in Jerusalem? Which men? Was it all men? No, it was Israelites that were to go to Jerusalem and worship. That's why the woman says where men are to worship. Men. Because it was commanded to Israelite men to go up to Jerusalem to worship at that mountain. Make sure you understand where men and which men were to go worship at the mountain. But Christ says, watch what Christ says to her. The Messiah said unto her, Woman, believe me, the hour cometh when ye shall neither in this mountain nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. Why? Why? Because Rome would come. Rome would come and destroy it. That's why. Christ knew Rome was going to destroy the temple in Jerusalem. That's why he said that. That's why he said that. That's why he said that. And we can easily go back to Psalm 74, but I don't want to add any more to it. The Romans actually came. Matter of fact, let's go to Psalm 7. Watch Psalm 74. I want to read. I'm just going to read on down and show you. Psalm 74. David records, and I'm going to be honest with you. However people feel, David records when Esau destroyed the temple. These are the people that destroyed the temple. Kenny Copeland, Jesse Duplantis, Joel Osteen, Charles Stanley, they are the children of the ancient Romans. And they know they are. And see, it was these people that destroyed the temple. That's why when you look at Psalm 74, look at Psalm 74, verse 2. It says, Remember thy congregation which thou hast purchased of old, the rod of thine inheritance which thou hast redeemed, this Mount Zion wherein thou hast dwelt. Look. Lift up thy feet unto the perpetual desolations. Been desolate for a long time, even all that the enemy hath done wickedly in thy sanctuary. So the enemy has done wickedly in thy sanctuary. The enemy. Thine enemies roar in the midst of thy congregation. They set up their ensigns for signs. So who are the enemies of God? Thine enemies. Psalms 83. Verse 1. Keep not thou silence, O God. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones, because at the end Israel would be hidden. But what I want you to do, they have said, Come, let us cut them off from being a nation. You're going to see that again, but when we go back to Psalm 74, you're going to see this again, what's written. Let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee, the tabernacles of Edom. He's the first enemy, the very first enemy that God mentions, the very first one. The tabernacles of Edom. This man. and the Ishmaelites of Moab and the Hagarenes. We're not worried about them right now. They're not leading the cause. The leader is Edom, Esau. So going back to Psalm 74, Psalm 74. Verse 4. Thine enemies roar in the midst of thy congregation. They set up their ensign for signs. A man was famous according as he had lifted up axes upon the thick trees. But now they break down the carved work thereof at once with axes and hammers, the carved work that was in the temple. Pay attention. They have cast fire into thy sanctuary. They have defiled by casting down the dwelling place of thy name to the ground. Who did this? He did. This is the destruction of the temple in AD 70. David saw it. David saw the Edomites destroy the temple. Watch this. They have said in their hearts, let us destroy them together. Wait a minute. Let us destroy them together. What does that tell you? Let us destroy them together. Psalms 83. We're going to go to one verse, then we're going to go right back. This is the verse. They have said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. Cut them off. Cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel will be no more in remembrance. And here, Psalm 74 and 8, they said in their hearts, let us destroy them together. Destroy them together. They have burned up all the synagogues. This lets you know what time period this is. The synagogues was in the New Testament. The only time the synagogue is in the Old Testament is this verse here. This is the only place you're going to find the synagogues. David saw the synagogues being burned in AD 70 and the people who did it. And it was these people here. And they know they did it. The Caucasian is who burnt up the temple and the synagogues. It don't give you the history behind things. And they said in their hearts, let us destroy them together. They have burned up all the synagogues of God in the land. They did it, the Edomites. We see not our signs. There is no more any prophet. There was no more prophet. Neither is there among us any that knoweth how long. How long is going to be desolate. But watch this. O God, how long shall the adversary approach? Shall the enemy blaspheme thy name forever? And the blaspheme is that Christ is white. The angels are white. We're the people of the book. That's the blasphemy. This is Revelation 2:9, 3:9. This is the enemy that blasphemed God was Esau. It's directly telling you who the enemy was that blasphemed God. That's why when you look at Revelation 2, we're going to come back here, Revelation 2 and 9. I rarely go here, but when I do, I go here for a reason. Revelation 2 and 9. I know thy works and tribulation and poverty. Somebody is causing tribulation and poverty. It's just not coming onto you. Tribulation and poverty isn't just sinking down out of the sky onto a people. Someone is causing it. Somebody is causing poverty. Somebody is causing tribulation. But people, they read that verse like, oh, there's tribulation and poverty. It's just coming from anywhere. No. But thou art rich, and I know the blasphemy of them that say they are Jews and are not, but the synagogue of Satan. See, synagogue of Satan. They are the synagogue of the devil. Not the synagogue of God, the devil. And see, we know according to Psalm 74. I want to go back to Psalm 74. We all have got to be retuned in this book, because the Christians have softened up our people to the point to where they don't want to know anything. That's why it says in Psalm 74:8, they have said in their hearts, let us destroy them together. Let us destroy them. Cut them off from being a nation. Like it says in Psalms 83, verse 4. When it says, they said in their hearts, let us destroy them together, that was cut them off from being a nation. They have burned up all the synagogues of God in the land. David saw who burned the synagogues. He saw who destroyed the temple. And it was these people right here. Come on now. I don't care what they say. History proves that these are the people that destroyed the temple and burned the synagogues. So when we go back, wait a minute. The book of John, I just want to picture. That's the appropriate picture. The book of John, chapter 4. John chapter 4, verse 21. The Messiah said unto her, Woman, believe me, the hour cometh when ye shall neither in this mountain nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. The time is coming where you're not going to be able to worship him in neither mountain because it's going to be destroyed. So understand, brothers and sisters, when we go back to the book of John, and remember, men come to worship. So that again, the law, what you read in the law, they were still doing. Our fathers worshiped in this mountain. Now Christ was on another mountain, and ye say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. Why? Because only men were to go worship there. So men are going to Jerusalem to worship, like it says in the Old Testament. They're doing the law in the New Testament. They're doing it. You can see it. Going back, watch this. Going back to 12. Verse 19. The Pharisee therefore said among themselves, Perceive ye how ye prevail nothing. Behold, the world is gone after him. You know who the world is, the Jews. And there were certain Greeks among them that came up to worship at the feast. There were certain Greeks. Now, common sense is going to tell you that these Greeks had to be a certain group of Greeks. That's why it says certain Greeks, not all Greeks, not any Greek, certain Greeks came up to worship at the feast. But all nations were not commanded to come up to worship at the feast, just the Jews that were among them. That's why we took you to here. Greece, Grecia. Grecia is Greece, the home of the Hellenes. Greeks and Grecians, however, are to be distinguished. Why? Because the scholars understood that there were two types of Greek. Two, not one. They didn't consider both the same. It was two, like the Bible does. However, are to be distinguished. Greeks are generally those of Hellenic race. These are the Jews. These Jews were Greeks. The Hellenic race were the Greeks. You can tell by going to the bottom. Hellenists, Jews who made Greek their tongue. So the Hellenic race were the Jews, and they were Greeks. Greeks are generally those of Hellenic race. The scholars are saying that those Greeks were the Hellenist Jews. They know it. Acts 16:1, Acts 18:4, and probably John 12:20. Why did they say John 12:20? Why did they say John 12:20? And there were certain Greeks among them that came up to worship at the feast. They know that these Greeks were Jews going to the feast as commanded. These Jews were born in Greek provinces, and they went from where they were born to keep this feast as commanded. The scholars know that these Greeks were Jews, Greek-speaking Jews, the Hellenic race. They were going up from Greece to keep the feast. You can even consider Greeks, as they say, Gentiles. Right? It takes you back to 1 Corinthians 12, 1 and 2. The Greeks, they were coming from Greece to worship at the feast. They knew that these Greeks were. Let's go back down. We're going to start right back. Greeks are generally those of Hellenic race. It lists the verses, but the word may be used to indicate non-Jews, like this right here would be the so-called non-Jew. Him. He would be the non-Jew. Him. Him. Him right there. Let's go back to the, sorry about that. Let's go back up to, all right. But the word may be used to indicate non-Jews, foreigners, and aliens. But still, there's a trick to that. Grecians were Greek-speaking Jews, folks of the dispersion. See there? They knew who the Greeks were. Grecians were Greek-speaking Jews, folk of the dispersion, the scattered. They were scattered among the Greeks from areas predominantly Greek. Easy to understand. That's why, going back up to the Bible, and there were certain Greeks among them that came up to worship at the feast. When we go to John 19, exactly what you see, John 19, we're going to get straight to the point. John 19 and 20. This title then read many of the Jews, because the only ones that came to the Passover were the Jews. This title then read many of the Jews, for the place where the Messiah was crucified was nigh to the city. And it was written in Hebrew and Greek and Latin. Stop. We're going to read that bottom part again. And it was written in Hebrew, Greek. Let's go back down. Now remember, focus. John 19 and 20. This title then read many of the Jews. It didn't say everybody read the title. It didn't say all nations read this title. It said the Jews read the title. For the place where the Messiah was crucified was nigh to the city. And it was written in Hebrew and Greek and Latin. It was written in Hebrew and Greek. Let's start again. Grecia is Greece, home of the Hellenes, Greeks and Grecians, however, are to be distinguished. Greeks are generally those of Hellenic race, but the word may be used to indicate non-Jews, foreigners, and aliens, which would be Esau. This is the foreigner, this is the alien. But an Israelite can also be a foreigner and an alien if he is in vanity with Esau, if he worships his God. That's why Paul says in 1 Corinthians 12, 1 and 2, you were Gentiles because of idolatry. You're considered the same as the other nations if you worship their God and keep these bogus feasts. And it was written in Hebrew and Greek and Latin. Let's go back. I just wanted to go to that verse, then we're going right back here. No, that's not it. This is it here. It says, but the word may be used to indicate non-Jews, foreigners, and aliens. Grecians were Greek-speaking Jews. See, Greek-speaking Jews were Grecians, and they knew it. They were Greeks. Oh, the Christians say, oh, the Jews can't be Greeks. Yeah, they were. Where they were born, they were Greeks. Folk of the dispersion. Dispersion means they were scattered. So what was the order? This title then read many of the Jews, for the place where the Messiah was crucified was nigh to the city. And it was written in Hebrew and Greek and Latin, because there were Greek-speaking Jews that came up to worship at the feast. John 19 is continuing from John 12. John 12 all the way to here is the feast of Passover. Yes, it spans over 6-7 chapters. The same Passover. Christ just spoke a lot of words in that night. John gave the detail. So once you see a verse like this, and there were certain Greeks among them that came up to worship at the feast. These Greeks were Jews, citizens. The Judean citizens of Greece were Greeks. Greeks didn't tie to the name of another nation. You have not seen that Greek tied to another nation. Not yet, anyway. Because the scholars knew what we're reading is what we're putting this together. The scholars knew that Grecians were Greek-speaking Jews. They knew that the Greeks were of the Hellenic race. Those Jews born there and keeping their customs. But what happens when these Greeks go to worship at the feast as commanded? They had repented. These were your proselytes. They were now going up to the feast, which was a right of the Jews, not everybody. So it's little verses like this you got to look into, brothers and sisters, and know, because you can see a certain verse and there were certain Greeks and not know that these Greeks were Jews, because they were the only ones commanded to go up to worship at the feast. There is no verse that you're going to see in the Bible where the nations went up to a Judean feast. It's not going to happen. Christians don't have that. They don't have it. So we know every time it says Greek, it doesn't tie to anybody outside. We already know that. We know that these Greeks were Greek-speaking Jews. We know that these Greeks were Israelites born there. We know. With verses like this. These Greeks, which were Greek-speaking Jews, came up to worship at the feast, because the only ones that were commanded to go up to the feast was Israelites. But it's verses like this that help you understand better that they took on the title of other nations. This is why we tell you all the time, when we read to you Acts, we want you to understand, when we read to you Acts chapter 22 and verse 3, it's very important that you understand. I'm just going to read the top. Let me go backwards. Let me read both of these. Let me see if I can read these. Acts 21, verse 39. But Paul said, I am a man which am a Jew of Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, a citizen of no mean city. And I beseech thee, suffer me to speak unto the people. Watch. Watch this. Acts 22, verse 3. He says it again. I am verily a man which am a Jew born in Tarsus. So Paul is a Jew. This is his ethnicity. This is his nationality. But because this Jew was born in Rome, you Christians, because this Jew was born in Rome, as they bound him with thongs, Paul said unto the centurion that stood by, is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman and uncondemned? Now Paul is a Roman. How could Paul, in two verses, call himself a Jew, and then in verse 25 called himself a Roman? They didn't argue with Paul. They didn't argue with Paul at all. And when the centurion heard that, he went and told the chief captain, saying, take heed what thou doest, for this man is a Roman. Come on now, but what was he? Really a Jew. But he was a Roman because he was born there. Just like the Jews that were born in Greece. They were Greeks. Can't change that. Then the chief captain came and said unto him, Tell me, art thou a Roman? And he said, Yeah, because Paul was a Jew born there, making him a citizen. Making him a citizen. So if I say, let me say it like this. If I say, let's go to the book of Acts 24. I don't think that's what I want. I think I want to go back to the book of Acts because I want to make sure I get this clear. Acts 18:20. When they desired him to tarry longer, or to tarry longer time with them, he consented not, but made them farewell, saying, I must by all means keep this feast that cometh in Jerusalem. So Paul would be a Roman keeping the feast in Jerusalem. But I will return again unto you, if God will. And he sailed to Ephesus. You got to think of this. Paul is a Roman going to a feast at Jerusalem. Most people get confused about this. Well, how could Paul be a Jew and a Roman at the same? You listen. Watch people these people are wild. They can't see. They're blocked out. Showing you again how that's possible. Look at the book and see. But Paul said, I am a man which am a Jew. Paul knew his nationality. A Jew of Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, a citizen of no mean city. And I beseech thee, suffer me to speak unto the people. Paul says he was a Jew of Tarsus. Acts 22:3. I am verily a man which am a Jew born in Tarsus. Born in Tarsus. Born. He was born in Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, yet brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, and taught according to the perfect manner of the law of the fathers, and was zealous toward God, as ye all are this day. So Paul is letting you know he was a Jew born in a Roman province. And what did that make him? What did they make him? And as they bound him, the him is Paul, with thongs, Paul said unto the centurion that stood by, Is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman and uncondemned? Roman. And when the centurion heard that, he went and told the chief captain, saying, Take heed what thou doest, for this man is a Roman. And the chief captain came and said unto him, Tell me, art thou a Roman? And he said, Yeah, because Paul was a Roman, because he was born there. He was a Jew born in Rome, but he was a Roman. A lot of people like to use the common equality to us being born in America. We being the true children of Israel, we're born in America, but we're called Americans. But what they like to do is they like to put a title with the American, like Black American, Negro American. They didn't do that in the Bible. They didn't say to Roman Jew or Jew Roman. It wasn't two nationalities like African American. They didn't use two nationalities in the book. Paul was a Jew born in Rome, making him a Roman, just like we're about to see again in Acts 2. Now we're taking a look at Acts 2. You're going to see this. Acts 2. And when the Pentecost was fully come, this is one of the feasts that they were to keep at Jerusalem. This was one of the feasts they were to keep at Jerusalem. We're going to read on down from verse 1. And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. And suddenly there came a sound from heaven, as a rushing mighty wind, and filled all the house where they were sitting. And there appeared unto them cloven tongues, like as of fire, and it sat upon each of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Ghost, and began to speak with other tongues, not unknown tongues. We got to go over this. It says other tongues, not unknown tongues. See, the Christian has that confused. He thinks he's trying to make you think other tongues is a wop bop baloo bop balop bop balop. No, other tongues mean other languages, not unknown languages that you can't understand. As the Spirit gave them utterance. The Spirit gave them utterance. Look at this. And there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, devout men out of every nation under heaven. So Jews, devout men, again, the men went to Jerusalem. Not the women, not the children, but the men. So when the day of Pentecost was come, which was the Feast of Weeks, there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, devout men, because only the men were to go to this feast. They're keeping the law. The same law that was written in Deuteronomy 16:16, they are keeping in the New Testament. They're doing it, brothers and sisters. They're doing exactly what the Old Testament says in the New. There is no Thanksgiving. There is no Easter. There is no Christmas. There is no Sunday worship. They're keeping these feasts, man. There's nowhere you... But look, I want to make a point here. And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. So the Pentecost is the Feast of Weeks. And where did they have to go? And there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, devout men out of every nation under heaven. So Jews came out of every nation under heaven, which shows you here in the book of John chapter 12 and 20. The book of John chapter 12 verse 20. And there were certain Greeks among them that came up to worship at the feast. Certain Greeks. Scholars know that these Greeks were Jews. Now, to further prove it, let's go back to the book of Acts 2. The book of Acts chapter 2, verse 5. And there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, devout men, out of every nation under heaven. Watch. Now when this was noised abroad, the multitude came together and were confounded, because every man heard them speak in his own language. Why? Because when you look at it, and they were all filled with the Holy Ghost and began to speak with other tongues. Other tongues. So is this a prophecy? Sure it is. It's a prophecy. Let's look at this prophecy, this beautiful prophecy. The book of Isaiah 28:10. For precept must be upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little and there a little. For with stammering lips and another tongue is other tongue, will he speak to this people. So with stammering lips and another tongue is the same as other tongue. Wasn't some gibberish. Wasn't none of that. These Christians make mockery of the Holy Ghost. But let's go back to Acts 2. Acts 2 now. Verse 7. And they all were, let me go back up to verse 6. Let me go back over to verse 6. Now when this was noised abroad, the multitude came together and were confounded, because that every man heard them speak in his own language, which was another tongue. And they were all amazed and marveled, saying one to another, Behold, are not all these which speak Galileans? So the Galileans, Jews, because only Jews were there. And how hear we every man in our own tongue wherein we were born? Here is the born. Born. Now it's going to list the places where these Jews were born. It's going to list it. It's going to list the place. Parthians and Medes and Elamites and dwellers of Mesopotamia and in Judea and in Cappadocia and Pontus and Asia. Do you know that every place that is listed here, these are what those Jews were called? These Jews were called Parthians, they were called Medes, they were called Elamites, they were called Mesopotamians, they were called Judeans, they were called Cappadocians, they were from Pontus and Asians. All of these Jews were what you see here. It's not saying Parthian Jews. It's not saying Mede Jews. It's not saying Elamite Jews. That's that crazy white crap. Elamite crap, brothers and sisters. They did not go by two nationalities. They went by the one where they were born. When they were born, wherever they were born, like Paul, that's what they were. As Paul was born, look, and how hear we every man in our own tongue where we were born, wherein we were born. So wherever these Jews were born, they were. It's telling you here. They were born in Parthian, so they were Parthians. They were born in Mede, so they were Medians. Medes. There was no double nationality. You don't see that. Parthian Jews, Mede Jews, Elamite Jews. You're not going to hear that. That's what they made up. The Jews that were born in these places took on the name of these places because what it says in Deuteronomy 28:37. This is the understanding. The book of Deuteronomy 28, verse 37. Just this verse, quick. Just this verse. Deuteronomy 28, verse 37. And thou shalt become an astonishment. So thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword. Every last one of those names you read in Acts 2 verses 9 were bywords among all nations, whether the Lord shall lead thee. So you're going to be a byword among all the nations. You're going to be a byword among all the nations. You're going to be a byword among all the nations. The book of Acts chapter 2. Let's again prove this. Acts chapter 2, verse 5. And there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, devout men out of every nation under heaven. So these were Jews out of every nation under heaven. And what did they call these Jews that came from out of every nation? Again, let me ask that question right. And there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, devout men out of every nation under heaven. What were they calling these Jews that were from out of every nation under heaven? Parthians, byword. Medes, byword. Elamites, byword. Mesopotamian, byword. Judean is the only factor. That's not a byword. Cappadocia, byword. Pontus, byword. Asia, byword. Phrygia, byword. And Pamphylia, byword. And Egypt, Egyptian, byword. They thought Paul was an Egyptian. Did you not understand? They thought Paul was an Egyptian. Let's go back. The book of Acts 20. And we know this. They thought Paul was an Egyptian. Acts 21:37. And as Paul was to be led into the castle, he said unto the chief captain, May I speak unto thee? Who said, Canst thou speak Greek? See, Greek. Paul can speak Greek. Greek speaking Jew right here, as mentioned right here. Let's start in the middle of, I'm not going to start at the top. I'm going to start in the middle. Grecians were Greek-speaking Jews, folk of the dispersion. Paul was a Greek-speaking Jew of the dispersion because he was born not in Judea, but Rome. So he knew how to speak Greek and Roman and Latin. But look, let's go back. And as Paul was to be led into the castle, he said unto the chief captain, May I speak unto thee? Who said, Canst thou speak Greek? Art not thou that Egyptian? He thought Paul was from Egypt, Negro land, meaning Paul was dark, which before these days made us an uproar and led us out into the wilderness 4,000 men that were murderers. But Paul had to tell him. But Paul said, I am a man which am a Jew of Tarsus. So this Jew looked like an Egyptian, which was a dark race, Hamite race. So again, Paul, I'm a Jew of Tarsus, but he was a Roman. So going back to the book of Acts, chapter 2, you have to use discernment, brothers and sisters, common sense. Parthians and Medes and Elamites and dwellers of Mesopotamia and in Judea and in Cappadocia and Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia and Egypt and the parts of Libya about Cyrene and strangers of Rome. So these Jews, I want y'all to see this now. These Jews that came to Jerusalem out of every nation under heaven, one of the places where they came from was Rome. That's why it says, and strangers of Rome, Jews and proselytes. So let me put that back up there. Jews and proselytes were considered strangers of Rome. Your strangers of Rome came to the feast. It's showing you the strangers of Rome would be the Jews that came up to the Pentecost. We continue to tell you, there is the proof again to show that Romans were Jews, as Paul was. You can't get away, Christians, when it says, and there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews. These Jews in verse 10 were strangers of Rome, meaning these Jews were Romans, like Paul. So as you can see, they're keeping the feast in the New Testament. But the only ones that are keeping the feast are the people that it was commanded to keep the feast. It wasn't commanded for everyone to keep these feasts. It was not commanded for Esau and other nations to keep the feast. You got to look at this through the lens of common sense, brothers and sisters. You're seeing which feasts are kept in the New Testament. You're seeing this. So I want to go back. I'm doing this. I'm going this way because I need to. I want to show you the book of Acts chapter 8. Now here's where they try to fit the Negro into the doctrine. And this is what upsets me. Now, we know this. Acts 8:27. And he arose and went, and behold, a man of Ethiopia, a eunuch of great authority under Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who had the charge over all her treasure, and had come up to Jerusalem for to worship. Stop. So this eunuch from Ethiopia was going to Jerusalem to worship. Where in the law did God command an African to come up and worship? Where? I'm looking for this. I'm hungry for this. I want to see this. This is why I went back to the Old Testament to show you the only ones that were to go up to Jerusalem to worship was Israelites. There is no verse in the Bible that will show you that other nations were commanded to go up to worship at Jerusalem at the feast. No other nation. There, it will not be found. Here is a man going up to Jerusalem to worship as commanded. You got to look at as commanded. This was a commandment, and this man was keeping this. So this man was an African keeping the law given to the Jews. This African man was given the law of the Jews to keep, or is this man, which is an Ethiopian and eunuch? This man from Ethiopian eunuch, was that actually an Ethiopian, or was it an Israelite that was from Ethiopia, a eunuch? See, the Christians, the Caucasian Christians, use this to say, see, an Ethiopian man, a eunuch, yeah, he came into the fold. This is how they say Negroes come into the fold. No, they are way off. This man of Ethiopia was an eunuch. Daniel was a eunuch, but he was an Israelite. The only eunuchs you see in the Bible are Israelites. It was foretold. In Isaiah 39. Isaiah 39. The only eunuchs you're going to see, brothers and sisters, are Israelites. That's the only. Watch this. Isaiah 39, verse 6. Now this is talking about Hezekiah. Hezekiah now. Or this is targeted to Hezekiah as a prophecy. Behold, the days come that all that is in thine house and that which is thy father's have laid up in store unto this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. Now this is because he allowed men to come in to see the temple, Babylonian men. But watch this. And of thy sons that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, shall they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. So the sons of Hezekiah would be eunuchs. The sons of Hezekiah. See, this verse lets you know that Israelites will be eunuchs among Africans. Again, Israelites would be eunuchs among Africans. Israelites. Israelites. And when we go to Jeremiah, let's go to the actual siege. Jeremiah 29. Jeremiah 29. I want to get to the point. Jeremiah 29:1. Now these are the words of the letter that Jeremiah the prophet sent from Jerusalem unto the residue of the elders which were carried away captives, and to the priests, and to the prophets, and to all the people whom Nebuchadnezzar had carried away captive from Jerusalem to Babylon. After that, Jeconiah the king, and the queen, and the eunuchs. Stop, the eunuchs. The eunuchs were Israelites. You'll never see another verse that's going to tell you that the eunuchs are anybody from any nation. The eunuchs and the princes of Judah and Jerusalem and the carpenters and the smiths were departed from Jerusalem. See, the eunuchs. These eunuchs were Israelites. We're telling you Daniel was a eunuch. He was an Israelite. So we go to Matthew 19. I just straight to the point. Matthew 19. Matthew 19. And verse 12. For there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb, and there are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men, like Daniel, the private part was removed. But there were some men that were born among the children of Israel, like Deuteronomy 23:1, I think, the stones. He shall not come into the congregation of the Lord. But as you can see, these eunuchs are Israelites. For there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb. And there are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men, like Daniel was. And there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. They don't have sex for that sake. They are only about the gospel. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it. So we can see verse after verse that these eunuchs will be Israelites. So how come when we go to Acts 8, now we're going to see Acts 8:27. And he arose and went, and behold, a man of Ethiopia. Who would this man be of Ethiopia? A eunuch of great authority under Candace, queen of the Ethiopians. Who would this man be? This is an Israelite. Because men make Israelites eunuchs. Like Christ just said in Matthew 19:12. Who had charge over all her treasure. Like Daniel had charge over the kingdom under Nebuchadnezzar. He was high ranked. And had come to Jerusalem for to worship. The only ones that were commanded to go up to Jerusalem and worship was Israelite men. And here is one right here. This man of Ethiopia is an Israelite. He was made a eunuch by Africans, like the prophecy said in the book of Isaiah 39:6-7. Prophecy is prophecy. Prophecy is going to come out. Prophecy is going to line out. This eunuch went to Jerusalem to worship, making this Ethiopian eunuch. And again, when you carry the title, a byword, we're sure that this this eunuch of Ethiopia was one born there in Ethiopia. And the proof he was an Israelite is it says, and had come up to Jerusalem for to worship. He was on his way to worship from the place where he was born. From the place he was born, this eunuch. The proof that Ethiopian man, that man of Ethiopia is an Israelite, is because he's going to Jerusalem for to worship. That's why. That's why we know that this man of Ethiopia is an Israelite, a eunuch, because he's going up to Jerusalem to worship. That was not a commandment for all people. It was not a commandment for all people to go up to Jerusalem and worship. And they can't prove that. They can't prove it. But the one thing that you're continuing to see, because when it says, come to Jerusalem for the worship, there was only 3 times. The Feast of Passover, unleavened bread, the Feast of Weeks, which was the Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles. These are the feasts that they are keeping in the Bible. Not Easter, Christmas, baby day, dog day, cat day, bird day. We're showing you the feast. This is what was happening. This is the Acts of the Apostles. So when we go to John 7:2, we'll start in verse 1. John chapter 7, verse 1. After these things, the Messiah walked in Galilee, for he would not walk in Jewry, because the Jews sought to kill him. A Jew seeking to kill a Jew. You know, Christ was from Judah. Hebrews 7:14. Now the Jews' feast of tabernacles was nigh at hand. Look at this. Let me read this over. I butchered it. Let me stop doing something else. I'm trying to go to another verse. Let me read this one. Now the Jews' feast of tabernacles was at hand. The Jews' feast of tabernacles. So they're keeping the feast of tabernacles. New Testament. Tabernacles. The 7-day feast. Look at what they're keeping and what. See, it's made for you to understand, brothers and sisters, with the proof that they kept Old Testament so-called, because the Christians like to say Old Testament, Old Testament, Old Testament. That's why I'm saying. They like to say, oh, well, this was the New Testament. We're under grace now. But you continue to see now the feast of the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles. And I can't understand why I can't read that right. Now, the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles was nigh at hand, or was at hand. Every worship that they were commanded to keep in the Old Testament, they're keeping in the New. Not one time have they done anything else. Not one time. But as you would know, when you see verses, because we're very, 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 very careful to explain to you that when you see verses like we've brought out, and there were certain Greeks, understand who these Greeks were that came up to worship at the feast. These were Jews born there. They were Greeks. But the Christians don't want you to know this, just like they don't want you to know, when we go back to the book of Acts 8. See, just like they don't want you to know that this Greek that came up to worship at the feast was an Israelite, they don't want you to know that this man from Ethiopia, a eunuch, was also an Israelite. They don't want you to know that. They want you to think that this man of Ethiopia was a Negro going up to worship at Jerusalem for the feast. No, that's unheard of. That you cannot prove that happened. They can't prove that happened, bro. They cannot prove it. And when you can't prove something, this man of Ethiopia, a eunuch, was an Israelite, prophesied. They were prophesied to be eunuchs. And he was going from Ethiopia up to Jerusalem to worship. Just like those Greeks in John chapter 12 and 20. Just like these other Jews at the day of Pentecost. These are all worships the law commanded Israel to keep. And there were dwelling at Jerusalem devout Jews out of every nation up under heaven. These were devout Judean men. And they even list the place where they came from. There was no two nationalities named. One. And all of these Jews were these names. So as you can see, when Paul says in 1 Corinthians 5 and 8, when he says in 1 Corinthians 5 and 8, I hear a lot of Christians use this too, but they have no usage for it. That's why Paul says in 1 Corinthians 5, let me read verse 7. Purge out therefore the old leaven, that ye may be a new lump, as ye are unleavened. For even Christ is our Passover is sacrificed for us. Now, our Passover would be whose Passover? The Jews. That's why Paul is telling them, purge out therefore the old leaven, that ye may be a new lump, as ye are unleavened. For even Christ, our Passover, is sacrificed for us, the us. Therefore let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, neither with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So when it says, let us therefore keep the feast, or therefore let us keep the feast, either way you say it, who's keeping the feast? The Jews, not everybody. So this is Paul letting the Jews know, continue keeping the feast that you were given. That you were given. Not anybody from any nation, because we cannot pull off record, not in the text, where anybody kept them. The only ones that kept those feasts, as we have read, were Jews, because it was their feast. It wasn't the feast of the Gentiles. The Gentiles were keeping other feasts, not these, not the biblical feasts that you are reading. We're in the New Testament now, brothers and sisters, and I'm continuing to read you verses out of the New Testament that say that they were keeping the same feast they kept in the Old Testament, like John 10:22. John 10:22. And it was at Jerusalem, the feast of dedication, and it was winter. See, every feast was at Jerusalem. Every one of them. They had to go to Jerusalem to keep certain feasts. Now, there wasn't a command. Now, the dedication is a feast that they kept voluntarily, because it wasn't one of the three God commanded them to keep. But they had a feast of dedication in Jerusalem. Every feast took place in Jerusalem. And the only ones that were at that feast were Jews. But the problem is, Christians, what they have done is Christians have set up themselves to deceive you by having you think that these Greeks will be other nations. No, the Greeks were, like it says, Grecians were Greek-speaking Jews, like Paul, folk of the dispersion, those that were scattered among the nations. Those Greek-speaking Jews were Grecians. They were titled the same as the white man. So was any Jew that was born in another land. So when you pay attention and understand, hopefully, that there is no feast that was kept in the Bible you can read about except the feast of the Lord. Even down to, look at this. Even down to, and I want down to the book of Acts 13. Let me show you what Paul and them was doing. Here's Paul the apostle. And when they departed from Perga, they came to Antioch and Pisidia, and went, look at this, and went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and sat down. Paul and them went in the synagogue on the Sabbath day and sat down. And after the reading of the law and the prophets, the rulers of the synagogue sent unto them, saying, Ye men and brethren, if ye have any word of exhortation for the people, say on. Now, the only ones that are in the synagogue were the Jews. Christ already said that. No one else. See, the Christians are trying to make you believe that everybody was involved in this. They were not involved. Christ told you who was in the synagogue. When you go back to the book of John chapter 18, and I'm building something. John chapter 18, verse 20. I'm going to tell you who was in the synagogue with chapter and verse. The Messiah answered him, I spake openly to the world. I ever taught in the synagogue and in the temple, whether the Jews always resort. Nobody else was in the synagogue and in the temple. No one else was in the synagogue and the temple. No one else. Only the Jews were in the synagogue and in the temple. And in secret have I said nothing. So we could see who was in the synagogue and in the temple, and it was only Jews. So when we go back to Acts 13, show y'all the sinister plan of the Christians. Acts 13. Verse 14. But when they departed from Perga, they came to Antioch in Pisidia, and went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and sat down. Who was in that synagogue? The Jews. But watch this. And after the reading of the law and of the prophets, the rulers of the synagogue sent unto them, saying, Ye men and brethren. Now, look at that. Ye men and brethren. Ye men and brethren. See, Christians always like to try to use that men and brethren like ye men is somebody else. No, the men and brethren were Jews, because that is the only ones proven to be in the synagogue. So men and brethren could be of the same people. Stop letting you, because they like to use this. They like to use this and say, I'm going to show you what they like to use it for. They're slick. Now, Paul is still in the synagogue talking. He's still in the synagogue talking to Jews that are there. Men and brethren, children of the stock of Abraham, and whosoever among you that feareth God, to you is the word of this salvation sent. Where is Paul? He's still in the synagogue talking. He's talking to an audience of Jews in the synagogue. And he says, men and brethren, children of the stock of Abraham. That men and brethren wasn't talking about other nations. The men and brethren was of the same people, the Jews. Wasn't nobody there in the synagogue except them. But they like to take verses like this and say, oh, it says men and brethren, men and brethren. Well, he's talking to the same men and brethren that were in verse 15, that were in the synagogue. The only ones proven to be in the synagogue were Jews. And he opens up by saying, ye men and brethren. Who would the men and brethren be? Jews. The same men and brethren that's in Acts 13 verse 15, which were Jews, is the same men and brethren in Acts 13:26. It didn't change. The men and brethren were Jews, children of the stock of Abraham, which is the race. And whosoever among you that feareth God, you, among you is the men and brethren, the same men and brethren that was in verse 15 in the synagogue. So this man and brethren doesn't equal to anybody. It equals to who is written, how it's written. Whosoever among you. So, that's the whosoever means who. See, again, wordplay. Christians and the wordplay. The whosoever among you is the men and brethren that he was talking about in verse 15 in the synagogue. Nobody else was in the synagogue but them. To you is the word of this salvation sent. He's talking about them in the synagogue. Targeted audience. He's not talking to everybody. But watch this. For they that dwell at Jerusalem and their rulers, because they knew him not, nor yet the voices of the prophets, which are read every Sabbath day. So they're still keeping the Sabbath day. Sabbath day. They have fulfilled them in condemning him. So they're still reading on the Sabbath day. They're still reading. Like Paul. He went into the temple on the Sabbath. The synagogue, on the Sabbath. The synagogue. And Paul is letting us know that every Sabbath day, the law and the prophets are read. Every Sabbath day. Every Sabbath day. And when the Jews were gone out of the synagogue, and Paul and them left, the Gentiles besought that these words might be preached to them next Sabbath. See, the northern kingdom, the uncircumcision of the Jews besought. They weren't in the temple. They did not. They weren't in the synagogue. I don't know why I keep saying temple. They were not, the Jews were when the Jews were gone out of the synagogue, because that is who was in the synagogue. The Jews. Well, just excuse me. I'm excited. I'm just messing up, but hey. When the Jews were gone out of the synagogue, because that's who was in the synagogue. So everything that Paul is speaking applied to the Jews in the synagogue, including Acts 13, verse 26. Men and brethren, children of the stock of Abraham. and whosoever among you feareth God, to you is the word of this salvation sent. They're in the synagogue now. But when we go to verse 42, and when the Jews were gone out of the synagogue, because that's who was in the synagogue, Paul was talking to, the men and brethren. The Gentiles who were not in the synagogue, who were on the outside of the synagogue where they belonged, besought that these words might be preached to them the next Sabbath. Why didn't Paul have to come back and teach the next day? Why come Paul didn't go back Sunday and teach? Why did they have to wait 7 more days to hear Paul preach again? Why did they have to wait? Why come they couldn't be the next day? Because they were never keeping another day but the Sabbath. That's why it says in verse 44, and the next Sabbath day came almost the whole city together to hear the word of God. But they weren't in the synagogue, though. See, they were listening to the word of God on the Sabbath. They weren't taking Bibles into other places on Sunday morning in brick buildings on the corner. They were reading from the Bible on the Sabbath. There's no evidence that they read in the Bible on Sunday morning. No evidence. No evidence. Acts 17:1. Now when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where was a synagogue of the Jews. Again, synagogue of the Jews in Thessalonica. Only the Jews were in the synagogue. And Paul, as his manner was, went in unto them, and 3 Sabbath days reasoned with them out of the scriptures. Again, Paul is reading the Old Testament on the Sabbath day. No other day they're reading the Bible. No other. You can't find it. Let's go to Acts 18:1. After these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth, and found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy, with his wife Priscilla, because that Claudius had commanded all Jews to depart from Rome, and came unto them. And because he was of the same craft, he abode with them and wrought, for by their occupation they were tent makers. But look at this. Here it is. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath, and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks. Wait a minute. Greeks. Stop. Wait, now you got to look. You got to look, brothers and sisters. Look. That is why. Remember, this is Acts 18:4. This is Acts 18:4. Let's go right on back down. Boom. Grecia is Greece, the home of the Hellenists. Greeks and Grecians, however, are to be distinguished. Greeks are generally those of Hellenic race. Acts 16:1, Acts 18 verse 4. They know that the Greeks Paul was talking to in the synagogue were Jews that were born in Greece. Because not any Greek is going to come into the synagogue. Ain't happening. Ain't happening. You will never find a verse where Gentiles went into a synagogue of the Jews. This verse here proves that those Greeks, as they know it, Greeks were generally those of Hellenic race. Acts 16:1, Timothy's father. Acts 18:4, Acts 18:4. They knew that these Greeks were the Hellenist Jews that were born there. They knew this. That's why they listed it. They knew it. Why? Because these Greeks were in the synagogue. That's how they knew that these Greeks. That's how they knew that these Greeks were generally those of Hellenic race. Acts 16:1, 18:4. That's how they knew, because these Greeks were in the synagogue. Showing that these Greeks were those Judeans or the Hellenic race that were born among them in the diaspora. But the biggest thing is they're keeping the Sabbath. As they are keeping the rest of the feast in the book of Acts in the New Testament, they're also keeping the Sabbath long after Christ died. Come on now. And they're reading from the book. Proof text. We're showing you what they're doing. We're showing you what they're doing in the Bible. They're keeping the feast and the Sabbath. They were keeping the Sabbath anywhere. They had synagogues everywhere. But 3 times a year they had to go up and worship at the feast. That's why when you look at Galatians, that's why when you look at the book of Galatians, this right here is we're showing you when you look at the book of Galatians chapter 3. When Paul says in Galatians chapter 3 in verse 28, there is neither Jew nor Greek, you got to question the Greek. Who was this Greek? After the evidence is piled up, this Greek was what? The Hellenist. This wasn't talking about any Greek. There's neither bond nor free, whether you was a bond born amongst them or free. There's neither male nor female, for ye are all one in Christ. Why were they all one in Christ? Because the Jew and the Greek were the same. The Jew was the circumcision. The Greek was the Jew that was uncircumcised. Romans chapter 2, 28 down. The same thing. We cannot term this Greek as any Greek. No, what you've read. Scholars know this. So we're showing you what worship they actually did in the Bible. They kept the feast and the Sabbath day. This is what they did. This is what we're showing you they did. You will never have a Sunday pastor show you in the Acts of the Apostles that they kept anything other than the feast they were commanded to keep. Whether it was the Passover, the Pentecost, or the tabernacle, all of them were shown to be kept by a certain people in the New Testament. And we will not find Easter, Christmas, baby day, dog day, cat day, birthday. We will not find it. But today, food is on the table. Whether it's the birthday, the Thanksgiving dinner, or any other feast day I have. All of them are pagan. And the thing is, brothers and sisters, is that many of them that keep these feasts think that God is going to bless them, going to continue on. And that's not biblical. Because when you go to 1 Corinthians, look at the 1 Corinthians 10. 1 Corinthians 10 in verse 20. But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to devils and not to God. When they have these feasts, brothers and sisters, they're not sacrificed to gods, it's the devils. All of these feasts are sacrifices to devils, wicked men that created these feasts. That's the devils. The devils are the wicked men that created these feasts. And not to God. And I would not that you should have fellowship with devils. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of devils. You can't take part in a feast that's not the Lord's. That's what he's saying. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of devils. You cannot be partakers of the Lord's table and of the table of devils. See, the Lord's table is the feast. The table of the devil is your Easter, Christmas, baby day, dog day, cat day, birthday. So you Christians that say, oh, I can keep Easter, Christmas, baby day, cat day, birthday. That's not what the Bible said. Paul says, verse 20, But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to devils and not to God. So the Gentiles are sacrificing in these feasts to devils, not to God. God doesn't accept them. And I would not that ye should have fellowship with devils. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of devils. You cannot be partakers of the Lord's table, which are the feast, and the table of devils, which are their feast, like today. Can't do it. Can't do it. Can't do it. But the Christians, they're quick to go to Colossians. They're quick to go to Colossians 2. They want to go to Colossians 2:16 so bad. This is, see, when they come up with these verses in Colossians 2, these are the little specks. Now, we told you the lazy Christian. These are brothers and sisters that are lazy. They want to believe against the truth by trying to think of things certain men say or what they say. Because not only did they use this, because I remember I read all the verses in the book of Acts about reading on the Sabbath, and there was one that came and said, well, it says, but upon the first day of the week, see, he went here. See, they go here. But upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, they didn't say they went to the synagogue and read the Bible. Do you see them going on the first day of the week in any building on the corner, eating bread and drinking wine and going home? No, they have worship service. This is not worship service. Breaking bread is to eat. And Paul preached. What did he preach? To them ready to depart on the morrow, and continued his speech until midnight. Meaning, if he continued his speech until midnight, that means that the first day of the week began at another time. And they know that. They know the first day of the week began at another time. See, Christians, I get them with this verse all the time. Well, when did God days start? Did God days start from 12 to 12 midnight like they show? No, God's days did not start at midnight. God's days, I want you to look at this, the book of Genesis. God's days start from even to morning. Look at this, Genesis 1. We're going to show you an example. Now, I wanted to show you verse 18. And to rule over the day and over the night. Now, these are the two great lights. And God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And the even and the morning were the fourth day. Notice it says evening, morning, evening, morning, evening, morning. Well, when did the evening take place? Because a lot of people say, oh, it's talking about out of this and out of that. No, evening and morning. God's days began at even morning. Let me show you. The book of Leviticus. The book of Leviticus. Leviticus 23. You see, can I get this real quick? Leviticus. All right. Now watch this. Leviticus 23:31. Ye shall do no manner of work. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. And now this is talking about the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement. It shall be unto you a Sabbath of rest, and ye shall afflict your souls in the 9th day of the month at even. From even unto even shall you celebrate your Sabbath. From even to even. from even to evening. So even or evening to evening is right here. But when does the evening take place? If God's day, because he's saying the ninth day of the month at even. So the ninth day of the month at even is going to actually be the 10th day, because the day begins at sunset. That's why it says from even to evening. Now let me show you that even is sunset. The book of Mark. Let me show you that even is sunset. Mark 1. Mark 1. Verse 32. And at even when the sun did set. So God's days begin at the setting of the sun. Evening was the setting of the sun. And at even when the sun did set, they brought into him all that were diseased and them that were possessed with devils. So the setting of the sun is even, and it begins a day of God. The even as sunset begins God's day. God actually calls the night day. Look at this. I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you. Watch this. When the Passover came, the book of Mark, I think, is 14. Watch what he calls. Look at this. You got to listen to the wording. The wording. Look. Watch this. And the Messiah said unto him, verily I say unto thee, that this day, indeed in this night. So he's calling that night the day. That night is still part of the day. That this day, even this night. Why did he say this day, even this night? Because the day began at night, sunset. Before the cock crow twice, thou shalt deny me thrice. So when the Christians come with Acts 20, it's a weak argument to come with Acts 20, verse 7, to try and say, oh, they did another type of worship besides what was commanded. No, upon the first day of the week, upon the first day, meaning the setting of the sun is about to happen. And when the sun sets, it begins the first day. The first day does not begin at 12 o'clock midnight. And the man that I contested against, when he brought this verse, he even said it was true. Yes, the days began at even. But there are some churches that go at midnight. I said, but is it your church? He said, no. See, this is why I don't argue with Christians. You don't keep a church you don't keep church into the night. You don't go to church on Saturday night and teach all the way to midnight. You don't do that, because that's when the first day, Saturday night at sunset, began the first day of the week. And that's the truth. That's why it says Paul spoke until midnight, because he spoke from the setting of the sun to midnight. A day begins at even, sunset. Evening and morning, that was God's day. It's not the United States of America day, midnight to midnight. That's not biblical. The day started at the setting of the sun. Now when you read it, and upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow. The morrow is when the sun rose. That was the morrow, when the sun rose. And he continued his speech until midnight. Midnight. Because midnight came before the sun rose. There's no people keeping Saturday night worship, as they would call it. But I would call it at Sunday worship, because it starts at sunset. The first day of the week starts at sunset, which we call Saturday night. That's when it started. And it was upon the first day, meaning it was going toward that, meaning the sun didn't even set. So he was preaching basically from Sabbath evening till midnight, the first day of the week. This is a weak argument to say that they worshiped on Sunday. It was weak. It's still weak. Even the one that contested with me know it was a weak precept. It's weak. So when we go right back to Colossians chapter 2, verse 16. Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of a holy day. Now, what is this holy day? See, the Christians will have you think when it says in a respect of a holy day, that's talking about any holy day. No, the holy day of God, you have to know what that is. In respect of a holy day, the book of Exodus 35. Exodus 35. Let me show you the holy day that Paul is talking about. Exodus 35 and 2. 6 days shall work be done. So 6 days shall work be done. But on the seventh day, there shall be to you an holy day. There is your holy day, the seventh day. It was the only holy day there was. That's why it says holy day. Day. 6 days shall work be done. But on the seventh day, there shall be to you an holy day, a Sabbath rest of the Lord. Whosoever doeth any work therein shall be put to death. So the holy day is the seventh day. The book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah 10. Nehemiah 10. Verse 31. And if the people of the land bring ware of any victuals on the Sabbath day to sell, that we should not buy it of them on the Sabbath or on the holy day. Because the Sabbath was the holy day. And that we would leave the seventh year and exact of every debt. See, the Sabbath day was the holy day. It was the only holy day in the Bible. There was no other holy day beside the Sabbath. That's why Paul mentioned holy day, single day. Isaiah 58. Isaiah 58. Just getting to the point. Isaiah 58, verse 13. And if thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day. The holy day is the Sabbath, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord, honorable, and thou shalt honor him. Not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words. So the holy day was the Sabbath, the seventh day. So when we got this on record, if thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, if thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day. Holy day. Holy day. The Sabbath was the holy day. The seventh day was the holy day. So when we go back to Colossians 2, verse 16. Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of a Sabbath. The holy day and any day, the holy day was the Sabbath day. The holy day is not Christmas. The holy day is not Thanksgiving. The holy day is not Easter. The holy day is not any feast that the Christians have. That holy day was the Sabbath day. And the reason why Christ told them, let no man judge you in meat or drink, the Christians still are slow. Going straight to the point, the book of John chapter 6. This is why Paul says, let no man judge you in meat or drink. Meat or drink. Why? Because Christ. John 6 verse 54. John 6 verse 54. Whoso eateth my flesh and drinketh my blood. Flesh, blood. Flesh, blood. Flesh, blood. Flesh, blood. Whoso eateth my flesh and drinketh my blood hath eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day. For my flesh is meat indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. There's your meat and drink. His flesh His flesh was the meat, his blood was the drink. His flesh was the meat, his blood was the drink. But guess what? When you go back to Leviticus, chapter 23, watch this. I just want one verse. I want to show y'all the secret of this. Leviticus 23, verse 13. And the meat offering thereof shall be 2/10 deals of fine flour mingled with oil. So the meat offering was bread, an offering made by fire to the Lord for a sweet savor, and a drink offering thereof shall be of wine, the fourth part of an hin. So the meat and drink, according to the Old Testament law, was bread and wine. And that is what the Jews who worship at the temple did. They had the bread and wine offerings. That was the meat and drink. That's what they did on the Sabbath day. But those that believe in Christ did not offer that, because he had become the meat and the drink. It was different for them. Those that kept the temple worship continued offering bread and wine, and they did not accept Christ as the bread and wine. They had not made Christ that meat and drink. They were still doing the priesthood, the meat and drink offering. This is what Paul was talking about. Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink. Let's go back to Colossians. Let's go back to Colossians. Colossians chapter 2. Verse 16. Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink. Why? Because the Pharisee, those that kept temple worship, were offering bread and wine. But those that believed in Christ accepted his body and his blood as the meat and drink. That's what they were doing. And Paul was letting them know, let no man judge you therefore in meat or in drink, or respect of an holy day. And holy day is of a Sabbath day. The holy day was the Sabbath. Let no man judge you what you do on the Sabbath, because they were judging them, or of the new moons, or of the Sabbath days. That's the rest of the Sabbath days, like the tabernacle, like the Passover, like the Pentecost, because this is all you saw them keeping. The Christians just turned this around and mocked it. When Paul says, let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink, the reason why is because these Jews were no longer offering meat and drink in the temple. Their acceptance of Christ being the meat and drink was how they respected the Sabbath day. He was the meat and the drink. He already said it. And of the new moons and of the Sabbath days. So on the holy day, which is the Sabbath, the new moons, which began at every month, and the other Sabbaths, we commemorate in Christ those feast days, not the old Levitical priesthood law that demanded bread and wine offerings. He was the bread and the wine. So each time we keep these feasts, it's to him. Why? Why? It says this, which are a shadow of things to come. Those feasts were a shadow of what's to come. But the body, see, there it is. The body is of Christ. Why? Because he became the meat and the drink. This verse does not say that any worship is accepted. Let no man judge you for meat and drink. What does that mean? They never tell you. Because they know if they tell you, there were things the Jews that worship at the temple did on that holy day. And there were things Paul and them did on that holy day. So Paul says, let no man judge you in meat or in drink. Who would be the man that's judging them? Those that were doing the temple worship. The Pharisee, Sadducee, scribes. They will be the ones that judge you. So Paul said, don't let them judge you in meat or in drink, or respect of an holy day, or what you should do on the holy day. Because they do something different on the holy day than you do. or on the new moons because they do something different than you do on the new moons, or the Sabbath days because they do something different than you do on the Sabbath days. That's why he says, the men that would judge you, they didn't understand, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. They didn't believe in him. So what did they do? They continued to do the Old Testament worship of bread and wine. This verse does not mean that we're judging them for keeping Sunday, Easter, Christmas, Baby Day, Dog Day. No, you don't even see it. They turned this verse, messed up this verse, perverted this verse, because Christianity is that religion that's going to take you to the lake of fire. They kept the feast in the New Testament. Bottom line, there is nowhere that you're going to see they kept anything else except what was commanded. And those that were commanded, like those Greeks in John 12 and 20, were Greek-speaking Jews. Acts 2, the Pentecost, all of them from other nations were Jews. And the eunuch that went to worship was also a Jew. All three of them. None. There was no Gentile that went to the feast. So what the Christians did, what these pastors did, since they know it, now we're talking about the ones that know. We're talking about the ones that know. These teachers deep down know that they cannot find a verse that's going to tell you they did any other worship. So why do they do it? Why do these preachers teach people not only to eat unclean meats, but also because we're looking at it. These are the people that they're teaching. These people don't have any knowledge at all. They think church is tradition. So they're going to keep tradition. They're going to keep tradition. But what they don't realize is that when you look at situations like this, 1 Corinthians 10, verse 21. I love this. 1 Corinthians 10 and 20. But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to devils, not to God. So when you look at these feasts, they're sacrificed to devils. Today, this feast that they call Thanksgiving is a sacrifice unto devils. Peace be unto you, brothers and sisters, all praises. Let us keep the feast that was commanded from the Old Testament and proven to be kept in the New. All praises.